When we reached out to our friends at the Criterion Collection, and here we have Elizabeth Pauker representing the Criterion Collection, they told us that they were releasing exactly in the month of February Una giornata particolare, a special day. It's my favorite Scola movie, and I thought there was no better way to pay homage to Scola than showing this film that is pure poetry in a very heavy historical context, with two of the most beloved actors of Italian, and I would say world cinema. And the testament to that is that the room here is full. We have more than 40 people in the library and about 20 in the lobby, standing, 50. So before we see the movie, we're not going to tell you the plot of the movie, we're not going to tell you anything about the movie, we're going to discuss it after. But I just wanted to thank once again the Criterion Collection for the great work that they do. And they're, of course, yes. Of course, they are a company and they're in business to make money. But in making money, they do fantastic work for not only Italian cinema, even if I'm very partial to what they do to Italian cinema, but for independent cinema, foreign cinema of all nations, and also for major American cinema. But you can be sure that when you buy a Criterion DVD or a Blu-ray, you will find on top of the film a wealth of other material that they produce, prepare with intelligence and love. And I had the chance to see some of this material to prepare for today. And there is a beautiful interview with Ettore Scola that I think Antonio did, and another one with Sofia, that you didn't do, Sofia. Too bad for you, Antonio. I feel really sorry for that. But some of our friends here, while I was previewing it, came in and saw bits and pieces of Sofia, and she was amazing in the interview. She's amazing in real life. So how do you go about in creating this package of things that come with the film itself, Elizabeth?
Well, first, I wanted to thank Stefano for including Criterion Collection and myself in tonight. It's our pleasure and honor to do so. But for Criterion, with each release that we are putting out, we want to think about what is the story we want to tell with this release, what are the things that the audience should know, and then once we decide on those things, what are the best ways to convey them. And we do a variety of research, reaching out to original sources. If people from the making of the film are still alive, we contact them, and also scholars. And it was through that we decide these are the things that we feel are important to giving people the full historical, social, cinematic background to understanding this film. So I was lucky enough to be the Criterion producer on a special day, and the supplements are very rich. There is an interview with Ettore Scola conducted by Antonio Monda that is fascinating, and this was actually the second interview that Antonio had done with Scola for Criterion. I had previously worked on a release, as had Antonio, of Il Sorpasso, which is Dino Risi's film, but Scola co-wrote it, and he also was gracious enough to give us an interview on that, and that was also an incredible experience. But for a special day, we have the interview with Scola. We did a new interview with Sofia, which is at her house. It's incredible. Just to see the house in the background is enough.
The orange and the red. And
she loves red. Everything in the background is red. She wore red. It was fantastic. She was very gracious to host. And there are also two really entertaining episodes of Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni on the Dick Cavett show promoting this film. But it was, the first episode is half an hour, and Dick Cavett liked having them so much and felt that the episode went by so quickly that he said, "Can you do a second episode?" which he aired a week later. And so it's really entertaining. It gives you some insight into their working process, but also just their relationship. They did over 15 films together, I believe. And so their relationship is incredibly important for this film and just in the history of cinema, and seeing how their repartee is so entertaining. I really can't say enough about it. So there's that. And then lastly, there is a short film directed by Eduardo Ponti, who is Sofia Loren and Carlo Ponti's son. And it is a recent film that Sofia did. It was the first, 2 years ago. That's recent. It was the first film she had done in many years. And it does, in some sense, have some ties to A Special Day. It takes place a little bit after the war, and it was also, we felt, part of the release that should be seen. So all of that and a trailer were part of the Criterion Collection story.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you again to our friends at Criterion. Okay, they tell me that if some of the students that are upstairs want to come down, there are no seats, but if they want to sit along the aisles, it's going to be sitting on the floor, but I will see the film on the large screen, so it's up to you guys. And they're very worried about you seeing them, especially. Okay, so look at them carefully.
I will raffle my seat.
Okay. We're going to start our film. At the end of the film, we're going to have a panel discussion about Ettore Scola, about this film in particular, and it's going to be with Antonio Monda, Jackie Reich, and Elizabeth Pauker. Please stay for that. Thank you very much and enjoy the film. Thank you all again very much for being here with us to remember with one of his great masterpieces, Ettore Scola. And on the stage with me, you have already met Elizabeth Pauker, who was the executive producer of the newly released DVD and Blu-ray version of Special Day with Criterion. And we have to her left Jackie Reich, who is the chair of the Department of Communication and Media Studies at Fordham University. I'm very proud to say that she begins as an Italianist that then blossomed in many other directions. Among her publications, all very relevant to the film we have seen tonight, I want to remember Beyond the Latin Lover, Marcello Mastroianni, Masculinity and Italian Cinema, and recently came out last year, 2 years ago, Maciste, Films of Italian Silent Cinema, and Divismo Maschile all'Italiana, Male Star Italian Style, that is forthcoming with it. It's out already. Divi, but it's so male Divi is really Jackie Reich's specialty, and Dr. Reich is going to be back with us. We are deciding the date between March 30 and 31st to talk about her Maciste, and we are going to have a screening of the movie Maciste preceding the presentation of the book. It's going to be a fun night, so as soon as we define the date and the members of the panel, we're going to publish on our website, and you're all invited to come back for that. So Jackie, but by association, having studied Mastroianni so in depth, you have also become a Scola expert of some sort. And so why don't you give us your assessment of Scola? We don't need to have a full lecture on Scola, but from your own specific point of view of Mastroianni and of I divi del cinema italiano, what's your assessment of Scola? What kind of person was he? What kind of filmmaker was he? And then we're going to move to Antonio Monda that I'm introduce when time comes.
Thank you, Stefano, for that lovely introduction. And I'd like to give a shout out to all the students who had to standing room only and watching this film. Thank you so much for staying. I hope you really enjoyed it. It's one of Mastroianni's great films, and as Stefano said, one of Scola's great films. I'm really not a Scola expert at all, but the fact that he made 8 films with Mastroianni, 9 if you count We All Loved Each Other So Much, in which he has a cameo, a really, really great cameo as himself. I think that I could talk a little bit about him. He was known as a director, but he really got his start as a writer on making some of the canonical Commedia all'Italiana films, and I'm sure Antonio can talk much more about that. But I would like to talk about him within the context of stardom and Italian stardom, because we had on the screen, 2 of Italy's biggest stars, and also biggest stars from an international perspective. And what was very unique about this film, although they had done it before, was both of them really played against type, right? Against their star persona. Sofia Loren, of course, being the beautiful Mamma Mia, Maggiorata Fisica of the 1950s and 1960s. And Mastroianni, you know, although he was sort of known internationally as kind of a Latin lover type, this was certainly not the first film that he played against type. He loved to do it because he didn't really like that moniker. He used to say that his legs were too skinny for him to be a Latin lover. No, seriously. And so, for instance, he, you know, in Divorce Italian Style, which I'm sure many of you have seen, he plays this very sort of inept aristocrat trying to catch his wife having an affair so he can legitimately kill her and get it, because divorce doesn't exist. And he played also previously Il Bell'Antonio. He played an impotent man, also in the company of one of Italy's most beautiful and prolific actresses, Claudia Cardinale. So you have him in here in this film with Sophia Loren, and also to understand a little bit of the contextualization, as Stefano referred at the beginning, they had made many, many films together. Most of those films, however, were comedies. So they made films like Matrimonio all'Italiana. They made, starting in the 50s, they made Peccato che sia una canaglia, right? And Peccato che sia una canaglia, and La fortuna di essere donna. And they were paired often as these kind of very comedic types. And the Dick Cavett interviews are very indicative of their relationship, because they had this kind of affinity also with Vittorio De Sica, who directed a lot of their collaborations. They had this kind of affinity of being from the South, right? Sophia Loren from Naples and outside of Naples, and Mastroianni really between Rome and Naples, which is considered Southern, as well as De Sica from that area. So the rapport that they have on screen is really something that had developed over time, and that I think a filmmaker like Scola, a brilliant filmmaker, also very attuned to character, right? I think a lot of his films are really interesting character studies, was really able to play on their chemistry on screen and off their chemistry on screen, as well as kind of going against type.
Thank you. And left to Jackie Reich, we have Antonio Monda, that of course almost all of you know, especially students that are here with us tonight, but not only. He's a professor of film and television here at the Tisch School of the Arts. He's also a contributor to La Repubblica for the cultural issues of La Repubblica, and a filmmaker in his own right, and a novelist. His latest novel, L'Indegno, has just come out in Italy.
No. Will come out next month.
Will come out in March.
In March 15th.
I love that in the cover it's Antonio Monda, new line, L'Indegno. It seems that he's the unworthy, but as a matter of fact, it's his character. It's a fascinating novel. It completes his sort of, it continues is it a tetralogy now about New York?
This is the fourth one,
Yeah,
and will be 10 at the end.
So it's his own exploration of New York through a series of characters that are somehow connected one to the other, from one book to the other. So it's L'Indegno. It's the new novel by Antonio Monda, published with Mondadori in March. And Antonio, as we heard from Elizabeth, was also the author of the beautiful interview that comes with the DVD and the Blu-ray of the film with Ettore Scola. So obviously you knew him personally also before doing the interview. And the same question for you as I had for Jackie, your own assessment of Ettore Scola, beginning as a screenwriter, very successful, very accomplished. At some point he made like 15 scripts before directing.
50. Actually, yeah.
It's a number that, you can add your own, and then we're going to see who gets closer. But he made a lot of film as a screenwriter. And when it seemed that was his job, ultimately, it turns out that he starts directing, and he directs very successfully. And in this film, aside from the criticism that you want to bring up,
very minor criticism.
It is a great film also from a strictly technical point of view. There is this fantastic one take at the beginning, and many other really magisterial points of direction. But tell us your own assessment of Scola as a person and as a filmmaker with this very interesting development in his own career.
First of all, it's very important to reiterate how fundamental was his background of a screenwriter. 70 films, you're perfectly right. Among them Il Sorpasso by Dino Risi, some of the Totò comedies, and many, many others, including the Antonio Pietangeli films. And by the way, I want to congratulate the Criterion Collection because they're rediscovering some of the lesser known great Italian filmmakers, such as Antonio Pietangeli, for example, and even Ettore Scola, who is not known here as much as he deserves. So you can see immediately how great he was as a screenwriter from the location, from the setting. The idea of having the entire film in a day, a special day, the day when Hitler comes to Rome, it's already a great idea, and it's already the great idea of the location itself, the place, which is in the Tuscolana Quarter in Rome, a very popular quarter. The second thing which is important and is quite underrated in Scola's work is the greatness of directing. What I mean by directing is not just the visual. The way he directs actors. There is not a single Scola film without a great performance, or several great performances. I think Jack is right, Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni are at their best, but even the American actor who plays Sophia's husband, Paul Vernon is the name, was never so good. To be honest, I still don't know why he casted an American actor for that role, but he's very good. He's absolutely good. And you can even say Alessandro Mussolini in a very small role at the very end.
We need to give a mention about that.
Yes.
You might have seen in the final title the name Mussolini, and it's Alessandra Mussolini, who for the Italians unfortunately all know about her because she's also a member of our parliament right now, but she happens to be Sophia Loren's niece and Benito Mussolini's granddaughter. Sophia's sister got married to one of Mussolini's son, and the product of that is Alessandra, that at the beginning cultivated some dream of becoming
an actress.
An actress, yeah. She made some movies, sort of with soft porn.
I know, yeah, soft porn. Maybe it's a little bit too much, but
Ultra soft porn.
But when Ruggero Maccari was the screenwriter, sorry.
But she was brought on the set of this film, of course.
When Ettore Scola and Ruggero Maccari brought the script to Carlo Ponti, he was at the beginning a little bit horrified because this is such an unglamorous role for Sophia Loren, and this demonstrates how intelligent she is to accept the role. She tried at the beginning to change a few things here and there, but of course it was impossible for this kind of film. But of course Alessandro Mussolini came with the package, so there is also the niece inside the film. The other thing that I want to say is, yes, this idea of location, this idea of writing, you can immediately see that the background of Ettore Scola is comedy Italian style. And I think the best of the film is more in the comedic side. And I'll try to say why later if you want me to. For example, in that fantastic scene where Marcello is, how do you say, grinding the coffee while Sofia is preparing her hair and pretending that it's just occasional, the fact that she has a beautiful curl. If you want, I go now to the very minor criticism because I have the students. Can I?
Aspetta, before the criticism.
They're very minor.
Let's praise Ettore Scola
a bit
more.
Okay, Scola reached his peak, his best, between the mid-70s to the mid-late 80s. And this is one of his great masterpieces. And I'm not afraid to use this word because it's an extraordinary film. To me, C'eravamo tanto amati is his best film, together with La notte di Varan. What's the Italian title? La nuit di Varan. I'm sorry? Il mondo nuovo. That's the Italian title. That's the Italian title. And it's a moment where he tried to switch from comedy Italian style in something a little bit more different, more serious, but still you can feel how he learned and how much he learned from that great lesson. You can see also other things. For example, the fact that he started working together with Federico Fellini and Marco Aurelio. There is a beautiful moment where Sophia Loren is reading something extremely and horribly racist against the pygmy. But also the way...
Marco Aurelio, we need to
have
a footnote. But Marco Aurelio was this satirical magazine. It was published twice a week in Rome, and it basically was a point of encounter for the people who would become the great protagonist of Italian cinema, especially comedy, but not only,
Yes.
with people like Maccari, Scola, Fellini, and many
Steno,
others.
and many others.
Scola was actually one of the youngest
Yes,
people.
there is actually a documentary
in
that
this
Scola
group.
himself. Actually, it's a strange mockumentary that Scola made 3 years ago called "Che fortuna chiamarsi Federico," in which basically says narrates the story of his friendship with Fellini, who was 15 years older than he was.
So Marco Aurelio is a satirical bi-weekly magazine.
Yeah,
that
which was
published-
extremely popular at the time.
Yeah,
Extremely
an
popular.
incredible number of copies were sold. You cannot say that it was anti-fascist, obviously, because otherwise it wouldn't have been published. It aimed first and foremost to make people laugh, but at the same time there were very independent, intellectually independent characters such as Scola.
When I emphasize the beauty of the comedic elements here and there, for example, don't call it pompon, but Italianize pompono, and there are many gems like this. I don't want to minimize the beauty of the portrait of the two lonely characters, the homosexual played by Marcello Mastroianni and the repressed woman played by of course, Sofia Logan. At his best, Scola was a humanist. He would interpret it, understand, love with passion his characters. And you can say here, as you can say the same in Il Mondo Nuovo, La Nuit de Varan, or in C'eravamo tanto amati. At his best, he doesn't judge, he just love and admire and respect all his characters. And this is something that not necessarily is part of the comedy Italian style tradition. It's a step further that he's able to do, because he was actually, together with Jeremy, I think, the best of his generation. Another element that goes in the direction of Marco Aurelio, which is actually one of the minor criticism,
He does want to come up with the criticism. Can you believe him? Go ahead with the
is
criticism.
the portrait of the concierge. Because you don't need a monster like that for that role. It belongs to a lesser film, to a less interesting film. The way she's portrayed, the way she speaks, the way she has hair everywhere in her face, and it's
But there are people like that.
Yes, of course there are people, but not in this film. You don't need that to deliver that message. And this comes from Marco Aurelio. This comes from that tradition. This belongs to a Steno film, not to this kind of a Scola film. You see, it's a very minor criticism.
Okay.
It's not the only one, though.
We'll accept it. We'll accept it. You should absolutely.
Thank you. I just drawing on that. One of the other really beautiful things about this film is, and here I'm wearing my other hat as someone who worked on cinema during the fascist period, is that it is very faithful to the fascist period, and beginning from the montage of the actual Luce films of Hitler's visit, to the set design, the typography, the kinds of the scrapbook that she makes was actually quite common. Many women and men made those kinds of scrapbooks. The story she told, the mythology of the hypersexualized man, as part of fascism. That I think is a very realistic touch, which I think in many ways does go back to the Commedia all'Italiana, and it's realism. Okay, but I have a question for the students out there. Did you guys recognize the actor who played the husband? Because he's in a canonical American film. He plays a role. No? Nobody? No students? Wait, we got one? Yeah? Close. Which one? He played Animal House. He plays Dean. He plays Dean Wormer, right? He's like double secret probation, right? So that's like. So I remember when I used to show this film way back when, he said, "Hey, that's the Dean from Animal House." So anyway, he made this film before that.
So we would say perfectly casted.
Exactly. So I had to add that. Sorry.
Yes. Jackie, before we pass the microphone to Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you something specific about, you mentioned about the Divo playing the anti-Divo here, being casted counter character. And there is something to be said also about this representation of homosexuality in Italian cinema. It's not that the character of the homosexual was not present. It was normally a mockery. It was normally over effeminate, presented with certain traits, very flamboyant. It's one of the first times, or the first time maybe, that you have a representation of a person like Marcello Mastroianni chosen to play this role. And one of the genres in which it was more prominent, this presence of the mocked and vilified homosexual character, was comedy Italian style. So what happens in this film? What happens with Scola? How comes that there is this sort of rethinking about the dignity, after all, of this man? That even Sophia, who is a very in the play, in the movie, is a very ignorant woman, is a very simple woman, and despite the fact that she's completely enthralled by him, but comes to respect this character.
That's a really good question. My interpretation of it, and I do not profess to be any kind of expert in the representation of homosexuality in Italian cinema. There are many people who know much more about it than I do. I think that for someone like Scola, who was so attuned to the historical accuracy of the setting of the story, that in many ways it wasn't that somehow the homosexuality almost plays a secondary role, right? That it's more the fact that they had to figure out a way to make him sympathetic and anti-fascist, right? So that he's a victim. And it's more kind of, for me at least, the notion of victimhood. And so I don't think this is certainly a landmark. I think it is an important film, but I don't think it's set out to be, a landmark film in the representations of homosexuality
I don't think I ever meant that,
in Italian cinema. But the fact that Mastroianni played it draws on a much larger tradition or larger sort of history of roles he played of kind of ambiguous sexuality. Certainly in Il Bell'Antonio. Yeah. You can even read in many ways La Dolce Vita is 8.5 as sort of a male struggling with his sexuality and sexual anxiety. So I think it does in many ways draw on that kind of character, that sort of that trajectory of Mastroianni's career. I don't think I discovered anything in the archives about that and how he was cast, but maybe you know more about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from what Scola had said, he did want to cast two people who otherwise were seen as being the opposites of this character. So it was intentional to have them both play against type, and I think considering their history of having been love interests in films, it almost needed to be this opposite representation, that they were love interests of friendship almost. But also, Scola himself had said that I think he had been a writer of many films of Commedia all'Italiana, and many of those films had mocked homosexuals or had been such an extreme caricature. And so he and Marcello very much wanted to make a film where it was a character so subtle almost. It's someone that, and as the character is trying, you wouldn't say, oh, and he's gay. It would be somebody who it is so subtle, it is not making a mockery, and that their humanity would be the thing that came first. But I agree, I don't think Scola was out to make a landmark film. I think he had his own personal reasons for having written films previously that had more caricature-like representations of homosexuality, that he wanted to do something different and subtle.
You want to add something on this?
Yes, on this first of all, you're perfectly right when you say that this is one of the first, if not the first, Italian film that deals this way with the portrait of an homosexual. But it's not very different from what happened internationally. There is a beautiful documentary about it that I strongly recommend called The Celluloid Closet. But I want to tell you a little anecdote that says a lot about even unexpected and extraordinary artist deals with homosexuality. 17 years earlier, Fellini directed I Vitelloni, as we all know. And there is a scene in the film where there is a famous actor who comes to town, And one of the protagonists, Leopoldo Trieste, who is a playwright, or he wants to be a playwright, wants to read his play to this actor, hoping that is the big opportunity of his life. If you remember the film, later we understand that, first of all, this actor is not interested at all in this play. Second, he's an homosexual and wants to, do something with this young man. So Fellini had in mind Vittorio De Sica for the role, who at the time was already, Vittorio De Sica, not only an extraordinary filmmaker, but also a very good actor. And De Sica refused to say, I will not play an homosexual. And this was only, actually he said something very nasty about it. It was almost offended to be asked to play an homosexual. And we're talking about an extraordinary artist, a very intelligent man. And so this was 17 years earlier. No, Scola was a friend of Fellini, a good friend of Fellini. They worked together on Marco Aurelio, but he never wrote any of his films. Most of the script that he wrote, besides the Totò and the Steno and Monicelli or Risi, are the Pietrangeli. All of 11 Pietrangeli films were written by Scola.
That were recently presented at MoMA for a retrospective of Pietrangeli, of rarely seen films.
And in Roma.
And at the Rome. Oh God, I forgot about that.
Before
Antonio is
Roma.
also the artistic director of the Rome Film Festival.
But we did Pietrangeli because I admire him. And since you mentioned the last public appearance by Ettore Scola was in Roma. We pay homage to him restoring La Terrazza.
Elizabeth, we're going to go back to you. So were there any things that were unexpected? When you start probably working on a project, you get together with your colleagues, you decide which are the movies that you're going to make, and you were given the responsibility to bring this movie back to life for American audiences. And so when you start, you have certain expectations. When you end, you have seen the reality of things. What was the most unexpected thing or different thing from what you had in mind when you started working on this project? Or what aspect of Scola did you discover that you were not familiar with?
I don't know that there was anything so unexpected. As I had mentioned at the beginning, about 2 years prior, I had worked on the Criterion release of Il Sorpasso.
Yes.
And for that, Scola was a co-writer, and we had interviewed him, and I had become very familiar with many of his works, both as a director and a screenwriter. So there was nothing so surprising about the film. I think with this release, something that is very apparent from seeing this restoration is the color of the film was very important to be mindful of. And that was a huge part of the restoration that was done for this, was that Scola supervised it to make sure that the color looked correct, because it is meant to be almost, it's not even sepia, but it's not even that, it's color. They actually, when they did the prints, after they desaturated it, they removed color, and it was supposed to have a gray leaden look, because that's how Scola remembered his childhood. He was one of those children who went to see when Hitler arrived that day. He was there, and he was shocked that Hitler, I think, had a red mustache or something.
A reddish hair.
Reddish hair.
Mustache, yeah.
But these were Scola's memories of his childhood. That's how he recalled it. And so that was what he wanted to represent with this film. And it's funny because Jackie and I were talking right before we started that she never knew what the film really looked like, and because she had seen other versions of home video. And
I've always seen it on TV. I've never seen it like on a large screen, and never on a large screen.
And over the years,
and with the proper color. And I think it's wonderful that you were able to do this operation under the supervision of Scola, because that is very difficult to achieve exactly what he had in mind, and that you explained so clearly. That it's not a black and white movie. It's color, but the color is so desaturated that it seems that there are only tones of the gray. Sometimes sepia seems to appear, and you remember vividly only basically the color of the flags, the real colors. Yeah, that dark red, that rouge foncé.
Right. So that was a really huge element to making sure that this film was presented the way it's meant to be presented.
Can we also celebrate the name of the cinematographer Pasqualino De Santis?
Absolutely.
Giant of Italian cinematography. He was the assistant of probably the greatest of all, Gianni Di Venanzo. Gianni Di Venanzo did 8 and a Half, and Salvatore Giuliano, and a few others. And his pupil was Pasqualino de Santis, the other pupil was Vittorio Storaro, just to say how rich was that bottega.
Wonderful. I think now it's time if we give the microphone to our friends in the audience. If you have any question for our panel, and feel free to ask or a comment.
If you don't have a question, I know there's a little thing that I would like to share.
And yes, while you think about your questions and Antonio meditates
it's not
about
a criticism.
the thing he wants to share, that is not a criticism, I would like to recognize in the audience what I call the last Italian divo, Vincenzo Amato. Please stand. He's the protagonist. Vincenzo is the protagonist, among many others, of the films of Emanuele Crialese, like Nuovo Mondo and Respiro. He's also played Einstein in the TV film under the direction of Liliana Cavani, and we are delighted to have him here tonight to celebrate with us Ettore Scola. Thank you, Vincenzo. Grazie.
Can I actually pose a question?
Please.
I'll pose a question to what
A good one.
I wanna, because I think that as an actor, for me, it was very interesting to see how great this actor. The performance was so good because they were so natural, and in the same time they were playing against the dialogue that to me was very, very formal and very theater-like. The lines, what they were saying, the Italian. I mean, the choice of the language was so formal and scripted. And amazingly, they were able to talk like it was like they would say normal things that people say. So that shocked me. What do you think about that?
You're talking about two of the greatest Italian actors and one of the greatest Italian director at his best. As I said before, but I would like to share with here also. What do you think? It's often underrated how great director of actor Scola was. If you can watch again Il Mondo Nuovo. It's a joy of acting, and yes, it's a camera piece. It's all interiors. This film. It's not the only time that Scola does a film like this. Think of La Famiglia, for example, or also partially Brutti, Sporchi e Cattivi. But I think there is greatness in the way they play with. Stiff lines that are written, of course, specifically because of the era. And by the way, how is possible that nobody will react to that phony rhetoric? I can't believe now. I know it's hard to say now, 70 years later. I mean, did you read the lines of that radio guy? Did you hear?
We suffer through that.
Yeah. How is that?
Always suffer through that. And also the whole liturgy of these parades, the mimic, the gesture, and it always surprises me. But whenever we see them now, we laugh about the way they moved, about the way they raise their arm, about the way they their mimic, their facial mimic, and you think that millions of people were completely enthralled by it. So you really wonder what was the mechanism behind all that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that because Sophia had said that to her, the character Antoinetta was very much a woman that was in her family, this repressed woman, this version of the family dynamic was so common at that time. And this role, it was almost as though she was born with this role. Her mother had been this role. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect to the complete other side of Sophia Loren, that this isn't, just a character, that there's a very true aspect of her that felt this. So
I just want to say a little bit about the performance style. That the director probably most responsible for training Sophia Loren as an actress was Vittorio De Sica, because he was the one who really, she had been an actress, and then she was in L'Oro di Napoli, The Gold of Naples, and in this one segment where she plays the pizza maker's wife, and he basically mimicked everything for her to do. So when her famous walk down the streets of Naples, he would do it first, and then she would follow, and said that's how she got it. So both were very kind of naturalistic, intuitive actors, and Mastroianni was famous for never preparing for a role, ever. He would just walk on set. I mean, he was the absolute opposite of the method actor. He hated method acting. He thought it was, crap. And so this kind of notion, I mean, when I first started looking at stardom, we really didn't look at the idea of performance, but that has come back a lot into studying acting and performance styles. And that whole kind of naturalism, I think, is very important. Although what's very fascinating about it is I think that there's a tension a lot between the kind of naturalistic style of their acting and the almost obsessive close-ups that you get, because close-ups are much more they're much more artificial in many ways in terms of expressing emotion, and they're staged. Whereas naturalistic, they tend to be medium or medium-long shots, or long shots even. So I think that in addition to the dialogue and performance, there's a real tension between film form and performance. And sometimes the close-ups also are really washed out, so that I think that they're even more desaturated. So again, to kind of create point of view, which is really, and also, the film is so subtle that it does so many things. For instance, the beginning of the very, very long tracking shot, or right before that, you actually see Mastroianni in his window. You see Gabriele there, so it sets it up. If once you've watched this film 100 times, like I have, like you start looking for things, and I just watched The Godfather recently, and I realized there was something in there I had never seen, and after seeing it like 50 times. So this sets up the space, right, very, very well. And if I'm not mistaken, the film was also turned into a play at one point, right? So you could see how easily it would lend itself to the stage.
2 characters, basically one only environment. It's perfect. I mean, one would think that it comes from a play. Yeah. Elizabeth.
One of the things that made me think of as this tension between their naturalistic acting and then the style of filmmaking is, of course, the soundtrack, right, which is constantly imposing itself on the scene and constantly, to some extent, bringing the viewer out of the moment of what's happening between this relationship. But of course, it's a commentary on how important the circumstances are to who these people are and this relationship.
Absolutely, and how perfectly chosen these lines that Antonio was mentioning. They were not randomly. Think that the parade was an affair that lasted hours and hours and hours. And what Scola does, he selects lines that are perfect as a sort of a controcanto, as a juxtaposition to what goes on the screen. The reference to virility in these speeches, they're the most recurrent ones. It is almost as if he handpicked the parts in which even the sweet virility, la dolce virilità of the song of the legionnaires, and how these, and granted that the whole theme of virility is a recurrent one. I mean, and our colleague Barbara Spackman, who taught in this department, wrote a whole book about fascist virilities. But the way in which the use of the soundtrack and of the references to virility, there is an underlining element. This virility that excludes whoever is different from that model of virility, being a man, Mastroianni, and whoever is excluded because he's a woman, and therefore relegated to the role of the servant of the man, are excluded. So even that is so perfectly done as to create a juxtaposition, a controcanto. I think we had another question in the middle. Okay, ma'am?
At the very end, the 2 men are waiting. I presume they're waiting to take him away as a homosexual. What struck me, I don't know what to make of it, when he said he needed a little more time, they were so gentle. When you look at their faces, it was antithetical to what you thought this was all about. I didn't. Can you explain?
I'm cynical, but they're lazy. They're not gentle.
Antonio said, maybe I'm cynical, but they're more lazy than kind. And I think it has to do with the fact that Antonio noted, of course, there is an element of caricature in the representation of the portiera with all her facial hair and being so nasty and being so stupidly fascist in her convictions. He probably didn't want to overdo it in the representation of the 2 policemen that arrested and that escorted.
Enough.
I think
The
that
black hats.
the concentration of negative stereotypes in the.
I just wonder whether, in fact, because to me it was just so obviously out of character, out of place for the time and place, that it was an anticipation of better times to come because there were people who didn't necessarily agree with the jobs that they had to perform.
No, I wouldn't go that far. The other thing that we need to remember is that people sent to Confino were in a sort of legal limbo. They were not real criminals because otherwise they would have been sent to jail and they would have served time in jail. This goes for homosexuals that, of course, were sent to Confino, almost all of them in Carbonia, in this small town in Sardinia, but also for political people that were suspected of political activity, but that could not be sentenced to jail time, not even by the special tribunal for the defense of the state. But they, even if there was only a suspicion that they were anti-fascist, that were subversives, and they could not be charged with a specific crime, they still would be sent to Confino. So it was this sort of middle zone between being a convicted criminal and being a free citizen, and therefore it might be with the fact, it might have to do with the fact that they're also, you see, is not handcuffed. They don't openly carry any form of guns or rifle. So it has to do with that. That the confinati were a special category of people. Of course, I'm not saying that silly statement of Berlusconi that they were basically sent to resort places. That's completely inconceivable. And the life conditions when you were sent at Confino were horrible. You could not receive correspondence. Everything that you received was inspected and censored and open. You couldn't have any contact with anybody if you were not authorized. You had to report daily to the police station and sign your thing. You couldn't exercise your profession. I mean, we're talking about very heavy restrictive measures for somebody, again, that is not being convicted of any crime. But at the same time, it might have to do with the fact that these two guards, apparently from the uniform, they're dressed more or less like Antonio with the black shirt under a regular jacket. They're probably members of the milizia, more of the police.
They're like the French milice.
Yeah, the milizia, the same word, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's possible, but I think that was more of a concern for Rossellini of Open City in 45, where all the Germans are horrible and evil, whereas the Italians are more or less unwillingly collaborating. I think Scola is sort of past that phase. Yes?
Can you tell us something about the painting that is carrying within?
It's a futurist. It's a futurist painting. It looks to me like either a Boccioni or a Balla. But I think that it probably, what could it mean? I mean, typically, oftentimes, futurism was associated with fascism, but my reading of it is that it is something that his lover gave to him. That's the way that it's more of a sentimental, right, that he can take with him. Right. So it's almost like the presence of the lover in the apartment.
And it seems to be the only thing that he wants to carry with him, together with them.
Yeah. Yes.
With the alliance of Germany and Italy, what is the likelihood that the character at the end will end up in a camp?
Honestly.
In a camp.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, you bring up something really interesting, right? Because what's missing from all this? There's no mention of anti-Semitism. right? This is 1938, which was the year that the racial laws were implemented in Italy, which were the first not the first, but the sort of the most effective discriminatory policy against Jews in Italy, and very much in line with Nazis, although there was plenty of anti-Semitism in Italy leading up to that point. But there is no presence of that here, and most of the people who were in concentration camps were Jews. So even most of the Italians who were sent to concentration camps after 43 were Jews. But this notion of confino, which is translated as internal exile, is something that's extremely prevalent. Was extremely prevalent at the time. We could think of Leone Ginsburg, right, or
Carlo Levi,
who wrote it, right?
Eboli.
But I was struck by that today about how, if we're talking about so much accuracy and the talking about the representation of the marginalized, where was the figure of the Jew? So, that's just something, I mean, like you say, you watch these films all the time, over and over again, and then you begin to wonder, where was that? But that's not a criticism of the film. Oftentimes, I think we run the risk of saying, well, the filmmaker should have included that in there. And I don't think the film suffers from it. It's a puzzling omission.
Yes.
But I mean, is he more subversive, as people?
But one of the things also we should say was that these subversives were just periodically rounded up when a visitor like Hitler came. Right. Yeah. So that they would come in and then they'd send them away for a while and then they'd let them go because they were showing that they were tough on the subversives.
And also because they wanted to avoid any possibility of
right.
public manifestation of opposition and so on. But your question is very interesting. There is a book that addresses specifically that. It's called Il nemico dell'uomo nuovo, The Enemy of the New Man by Lorenzo Benaduzzi. We presented it here. It has also been translated into English, I believe by Harvard University Press. But if you look up Lorenzo Benaduzzi, he studied particularly the condition of homosexuals in Italy during fascism, both from a symbolical point of view, representation, but also what actually happened. They were never rounded up with the same systematic viciousness with which Italian Jews were rounded up. But several Italian homosexuals were also sent to concentration camps. Normally when that also was connected to some sort of anti-fascist political activity. So when the two things combine, so they hand them over to the Germans. But it's not that necessarily all the people that were sent to internal confinement because they were homosexuals were delivered to the Nazi. That didn't happen, we have to say. Yes, one.
Just one thing I wanted to add to what Jackie was saying before, which is what's missing is the character of the Jew. And I think that maybe Scola would have actually been very attuned to perhaps if, let's say, Antoinetta had been a Jewish family, it would almost be too tidy. They would almost represent too easily and tidily all the victims, and they represent victimhood. And I think Scola was a subtle enough filmmaker to, I think that, it would be overboard to have them represent everything.
Okay. Yes?
Pasolini was gay, and but came from a wealthy family. Does the class situation in Italy have anything to do with his not being rounded up?
Well, he was murdered.
No, Pasolini? No, but not being rounded up by the fascists, you mean?
He was too young.
He was young. He was. How old was he during the last years of the war, Pasolini?
He would have been just born.
22. So he was 22, 23. Probably at that time he was not known as such. He didn't belong to a particularly wealthy family, Pasolini, actually.
I would say middle class.
Lower middle. Yeah.
But he was expelled from the communist party.
He was a very good point, Vincenzo. He was expelled from the Communist Party because he was homosexual. After World War II, obviously, and that's also one of the reasons why he left. That's why one of the reasons he left Friuli and moved to Rome, actually. Ma'am.
Yeah, I thought the apartment building was, in its own way, a star. I mean, it was so and I was surprised to realize that it wasn't a set.
No.
but I think it contributed a lot to so much of the film.
Can we mention also the name of the production designer, Luciano Vicceri, who was a regular collaborator of Ettore Scola. You're totally right, he's the star of the film.
It's fascist architecture, pure fascist architecture.
And those are
it's
still very much around in Italy
yes.
today, this type of mega complex.
Probably they removed the fascilitori from the doorways. No. That's not. No, but they were made in marble. But not in all buildings. They're not been taken down from all the buildings. In some, they're still there.
But it's a huge visible
Very much so.
mark left over from the fascist
Yeah.
period. Yeah.
We have obelisks and dukes.
It's also in some ways similar to the casamento where the protagonists of Open City live. Like the inner courtyard, that one is less beautiful less fascist.
Fascist architecture.
This one has some pretense of beauty and architectural achievement of some sort, but it's the same structure. Questi casamenti, and each of them, they became a sort of a landmark of popular fascist residential architecture.
But I was just saying, I think it goes back to, again, Scola's sort of foundation, which was built at working at Marco Aurelio, which is everything came from current events in real life. They worked at Marco Aurelio where they'd open the newspaper and they would use that to take what are they going to use in their next issue. And so I think that is a thread throughout Scola's films, whether comedies or tragedies, this idea of commenting on Italy and Italians, and that if it's not true to real life, then that's not what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And so, shooting the film in this very recognizable and identifiable location, these mega complexes, as I think of them, is, I think, another part of that.
Thank you. Antonio?
You might, if we are closing, I wanted
Yeah.
just to share
Oh, wow.
a little. No, it's not a criticism. It's just I'll keep it for me. In the documentary that we screened in Roma, directed by Paola Scola, who is Ettore Scola's daughter, together with the restoration of La Terrazza, Scola declares that when he was at Marco Aurelio and also at the beginning of his career as a screenwriter, both the editor-in-chief of Marco Aurelio and later the producer taught him one lesson. Every film, every story must give us at least one moment of laugh, one moment of laughter, one moment of joy. And even in this film, which is definitely a very sad film, you have a couple of moments of joy. But the thing that I wanted to point out is I learned 2 or 3 horrifying things in this film. First of all, I didn't know there was a tax for being bachelor. Honestly, I didn't know.
The interesting thing about that is that, as you heard, there was a prize for numerous families.
Yes. And they want to reach
and they also there was a special subsidy given to single mothers called bagliatico.
Yes, this I know.
How did they pay the bagliatico and the prize for numerous families? With the tax that they imposed on people that were not married.
The second
it's a perfect symmetry. You tax the bachelor, the singles, and you give prizes to prolific mothers or to single mothers. That it's more advanced than George Bush anyway. Who would like to punish single mothers. So on some level, fascism was ahead of him.
The second thing that was to me horrifying, to everybody's horrifying, is that statement of Mussolini about only men can be geniuses, basically. But there is an interesting thing in the album, the photo album. There is a strong blow at the Agnelli family. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I noticed that.
Because among the many, many characters with whom Mussolini was close, he picked Gianni Agnelli's grandfather. And the reason being that Scola was very close to the CGIL, to the union, the Communist Union, who was at the time strongly against Fiat, strongly against Agnelli, and he was also directing, more or less in the same period, a documentary called Trevico Torino Viaggio nel Vietnam, del Vietnam. Trevico is the place where Scola was born. Torino is, of course, the city, Turin, where Fiat is. And he plays with the word Vietnam and Vietnam. This, how much he was against Agnelli and So when you read the Senator Agnelli with Mussolini,
But that opens another very interesting chapter. We don't have time to face it, but regarding a gender reading of this film, where it's a woman that collects this album of pictures with these very insulting statements regarding women, and her almost mystical
believes it.
Yeah, totally. And this almost mystical experience when she runs into Mussolini riding his horse in Villa Borghese, and it seems that she almost got pregnant of her own son just from a look of Mussolini from the horse. And of course she calls him Littorio, that it probably escapes those of you who are not Italian speakers. Littorio, that seems like Vittorio, but comes from the fasci, from the symbol of fascism. So she calls the little boy Littorio, like the symbol of fascism. But that is also, as Jackie and Elizabeth underlined, very historically accurate. If you go to the Archivio Centrale dello Stato, you find thousands and thousands and thousands of letters written by Italian women to Mussolini, most of them being love letters, not letters of admiration of a citizen to a political leader, truly love letters, very passionate. And some of them have been published, many of them have been... Yes. And also Christopher Duggan, in one of his latest books, presented some also of the letters written by women to Mussolini. So that's a completely different story, but even the little references that you have in Scola's film to it are accurate and to the point. So one more aspect for which we are indebted to Ettore Scola. I think this is all the time we had. I wasn't even expecting we would go on so long. And I would like to thank the members of my panel, Elizabeth Pauker, Jackie Reich, and Antonio Monda. Thank you very much.